Hey guys, I'm going to read chapters 18 and 19 today. Chapter 18. Dr. Reaper's laboratory was clearly divided into two parts. On one side, a strange-looking chemistry experiment was in progress. Lots of glass balls were linked together to others via glass tubes. One of the balls was connected to what looked like a miniature volcano. Most of the volcano fumes funneled upward into the glass ball, but from time to time, little wisps of them leaked out. Gas poured from one glass ball to the next, eventually ending up in one large ball in the center. There was a cloud inside this last ball, and now and then they saw sparks fly around. "So, who wants to go first with questions?" asked Dr. Reaper, excited to have an audience. Ringo sighed. "Sir, what is that?" he said, pointing to the large chemistry experiment. "Aha," said Dr. Reaper, grinning and rubbing his hands. "I'm sure you remember the wonderful rotten egg stink you smelled when you entered the house. Well, do you know what it is?" "Rotten eggs?" piped up Tank, feeling a bit happy he knew the answer. "Stupid child," grumbled Dr. Reaper. "You'll have to try harder than that if you want to become a scientist. Think, what could it be? Such an easy answer." The boys looked at each other and shrugged. "Don't know," they all murmured. "Dear, oh dear," sighed Dr. Reaper. "Children today, they really do not know anything. It is the smell of the earth, billions of years ago, when there was no life on it." "Well, how are we supposed to know that?" moaned Whippet. But Dr. Reaper ignored him. "This isn't a real volcano, obviously," he continued, pointing at the small homemade volcano which had smoke erupting from the crater at its top. "Yeah, obviously," murmured Ringo. "I mean, we hadn't noticed that. It's just a little chemical reaction that emits the same kind of fumes," Dr. Reaper enthused, seemingly unaware of Ringo's rudeness. "So I made it look like a little volcano with mud from the garden. I like it very much." The fumes from the volcano puffed upward into the glass ball, where they mixed with water vapor. This came from another glass ball, which water was being heated over a gas burner. When they mixed together, the fumes and vapor formed a little cloud inside the large ball. Dr. Reaper had built a device inside that cloud that produced electrical sparks. As the mini volcano puffed dark smoke upward, a little crack of lightning shot across the cloud inside the ball. Dr. Reaper tapped the glass gently. "You see, when lightning strikes clouds of gas, strange reactions occur, and scientists have discovered that these reactions can sometimes lead to the formation of the most basic chemicals that life on Earth needs. These chemicals are called amino acids." "But why?" said Whippet. "What do you want them for?" "Because," Dr. Reaper said, in a sinister look crossing his face, "I'm trying to create life itself." "What a load of garbage," said Ringo under his breath, but Zit sounded more intrigued than his leader did. "Sir," he said thoughtfully, "there's lots of life around us. Why would you need to make some more?" "There is on this planet," replied Dr. Reaper, giving him an approved look. "But what about another planet? What about another planet where life has not yet emerged? What would happen if we went there and took life with us?" "Sounds a bit stupid to me," said Ringo. "If we go to a new place, there won't be anything there, so there'll be nothing to do." "Oh, unimaginative boy," cried Dr. Reaper. "We would be masters of the planet. It would be all ours." "But hang on a minute," said Whippet, somewhat suspiciously. "Where is this planet, and how are we going to get there?" "All good questions," said Dr. Reaper. "Come and have a look over here." He walked over to the other side of the room, which was covered with a huge picture of space and stars. In one corner there was a red circle around a couple of little white dots with lots of arrows pointing at it. Near that red circle was another circle drawn in green, except that the green circle seemed to be empty. Next to the map were whiteboards covered with diagrams and crazy-looking scribbles. There seemed to be some kind of link between the scribbles and the star poster. Dr. Reaper cleared his throat, and the boys gathered around him. This, children, is the future," he said, waving his hands toward the crazy scribbles. "Our future. Except," he continued, you have never given a moment's thought to what I do when I'm not teaching at school." The group nodded, agreeing that no, they hadn't. "So let me save you the trouble. Dr. Reaper drew himself up into his full height and towered over the boys. "I'm an expert on planets. I have worked all my life on planets trying to find new ones." "Did you find any?" asked Whippet. "I found many," replied Dr. Reaper proudly. But don't we know them all, like Mars and Saturn or Jupiter? Asked Whippet again. The other boys nudged each other. Ooh, whispered Tank. Who'd have thought Whippet's trying to be a teacher's pet? No, I'm not, huffed Whippet. It's just interesting, that's all. Ah, said Dr. Reaper, you are right. We know all of the planets that are around the star closest to the Earth, the star that we call the Sun. But I'm looking for other ones. I'm looking for planets that are around other stars, planets that are very far away. You see, he continued, enjoying having his class, or a few of them anyway, actually listen to what he said for a change. A planet is not an easy thing to find. I have spent years collecting data from telescopes, and I have looked at hundreds of planets in space. Unfortunately, most of the planets we have found so far are too close to their sun, making them too hot to support life and be habitable. That's not going to help then, is it? Said Whippet, sounding disappointed. Dr. Reaper pointed at his map. But wait, he said, I haven't told you everything yet. Out there in space are extraordinary, fantastic things that until now we have only been able to dream about. But the time is coming when all of that will change. When man will go across the cosmos and inhabit the whole universe. Just imagine, boys, if we were the first to discover a whole new planet. That's like that TV show, said Zit cheerfully, where everyone gets on a spaceship and goes to a new planet, where they get eaten by green aliens. No, it's not like that at all, snapped Dr. Reaper. You must learn to distinguish between science fiction and science fact. This planet here that I have found, his finger traced the red circle drawn on the corner of the map around the white dots, could be the new planet Earth. But it looks like this new planet is pretty far away, said Whippet doubtfully. Yes, it is, agreed the teacher. It is very, very, very far. So far that if I had a phone conversation with someone there, I would need to wait several years between the time that I ask a question and the time that they reply, just because of the time it would take my question to travel there and their reply to travel back again. Did you talk with them on the phone? The four kids said in unison. No, said Dr. Reaper in an annoyed voice. I said if I had. Don't you understand anything? But is there anyone out there? Zip persisted, hopping from foot to foot in excitement. It's hard to tell, said Dr. Reaper, so I need to get out there and have a look. How are you going to do that? Asked Ringo, who was feeling interested now in spite of himself. Dr. Reaper gazed into the distance over their heads. I have been trying all my life to get into outer space, he said. Once I nearly made it, but someone stopped me, and I have never been able to forgive him. It was the greatest disappointment of my life. Ever since then, I've been looking for a way, and now I've got another chance. That's where you boys come in. Dr. Reaper reached for the letter in his pocket. Here's the letter that we spoke about in the driveway. Take it to George's friend. His name is Eric. Drop it in his mailbox and make sure no one sees you, said the teacher as he handed the letter over to Ringo. What's in it? Asked Ringo. Some information, replied Dr. Reaper. Information is power, boys. Always remember that, facing his star map and pointing with his burned hands toward the red circle drawn around the bright dots, he said. And the information contained in this letter is the space location of this amazing new planet, Earth number 2. Whippet opened his mouth to speak, but Dr. Reaper interrupted him. Drop off the letter tonight, he said, cutting short any questions. And now it's time for you to go, he added, hurrying them back out into the hallway. What about the cash? asked Ringo sharply. When do we get our money? Come and see me on Monday at school, said Dr. Reaper. If you've delivered the letter, I will pay you handsomely. Now go. Chapter 19. At lunchtime on Monday, George was sitting quietly in the school cafeteria, minding his own business. He got out his lunchbox and looked inside it, wishing he could have bags of chips or chocolate bars or orange soda like the other kids. Instead, he had a spinach sandwich, a hard-boiled egg, and yet more broccoli muffins, and some apple juice pressed by his mother. He took a large bite of his sandwich inside. He wished his parents would understand that he wanted to save the planet as much as they did, but he wanted to do it in his own way. It was all very well for his parents to lead their alternative lifestyles because they only hung around with their friends, who were just like them. They didn't have to go to school every day with people like Ringo and his gang laughing at them because they wore funny clothes and ate different food and didn't know what happened yesterday on the television. He tried to explain this to his dad, but all he heard back was, "We all have to do our part, George, if we're going to save the Earth." George knew this was true. He just thought it was unfair and rather pointless that his part meant him being the laughingstock at school and not having a computer at home. He had tried to explain to his parents how useful a computer could be. "But Dad," he had pointed out, "there's stuff you could do on a computer too, stuff that would help you with your work. I mean, you could get lots of information from the internet and organize your marches with emails. I could set it all up for you and show you how." George had gazed hopefully at his dad. He thought he saw a spark of interest in his dad's eyes, but it flickered and died. "I don't want to talk about it anymore," his dad had said. "We're not getting a computer, and that's final." That, thought George, as he tried to swallow his lump of spinach sandwich, was why he had liked Eric so much. Eric had listened to George's questions and given him honest replies, one that made sense to George. George wondered if he dared stop by and see Eric later that afternoon. There was so much he wanted to ask him, and also he really wanted Eric to check his talk for the competition. Just before lunch, he had finally summoned up the courage to sign up on the board for the science competition, the one with a computer as the first prize. Under topic, he had written "My Amazing Rock from Outer Space." It looked great as a title, although George still wasn't sure his talk was any good. He had taken his lucky rock from outer space out of his pocket while he stood in front of the bulletin board, but to his horror he had found it was crumbling into dust. It was his lucky charm, the little piece of the solar system he had picked up near Saturn. The principal had been delighted to see George writing his name on the board. He had bounced up as George filled out the form. "There you go, George. That's the spirit. We'll show them, won't we?" He beamed at George. "We can't just let Manor Park walk away with every trophy in the area, can we now?" Manor Park was a private school that hogged all the prizes and won all the sports matches with boring regularity. "Yes, sir," said George, trying to stuff his outer space rock back into his pocket, but the sharp-eyed principal spotted it. "Oh, dear, a handful of dirt," he said, grabbing a nearby trash can. "Toss it in here, George. We can't have you going off to lunch with a pocket full of dust." When George stood there, rooted to the spot, the principal rattled the can impatiently under his nose. I was just the same as a boy," he said, a claim George doubted. As far as he was concerned, the principal had never been a boy. He had been born wearing a suit and making enthusiastic comments about the under-12 football league. "Pockets full of nonsense. Drop it in and off you go." Reluctantly, George dropped the gray, crumbly remains of his most treasured possession into the can. He promised himself he would come back later and try to save it. As George munched his way through his sandwich, he thought about Eric and outer space and the competition the next day. While he was thinking, a hand crept over his shoulder and snatched a muffin out of his lunchbox. "Yum! This looks good," said Ringo's voice behind him. "Georgie's famous muffins." Ringo took a large bite and then made a spluttering sound as he spat it out. George didn't need to look around to know that the whole dining room would be staring in his direction and snickering. "Ugh, that's so gross," said Ringo, making a fake gagging sound behind him. "Let's see if the rest is just as horrible." His hand made another dive for George's lunch, but George had had enough. As Ringo's big paw rooted inside the handmade wooden box in which he kept his sandwiches, George slammed the lid down on his fingers. "Ow!" squealed Ringo. "Ow, ow, ow!" George opened the box again, allowing Ringo to pull out his hand. "What's all this noise?" said the teacher on the lunchroom duty, walking over. "Can't you boys manage to do anything without causing trouble?" "Sir, Dr. Reaper, sir," said Ringo, who was cradling his damaged hand. "I was just asking George what he had for lunch when he attacked me, sir. You better give him double detention, sir, for the rest of the term. He's broken my hand, sir." Ringo smirked at Dr. Reaper, who gave him a cool glance. "Very well, Richard," he said. "Go and see the school nurse and come to my room when she's looked at your hand. I'll deal with George." He ordered him away with a point of his finger, and Ringo slouched away, grinning to himself. The rest of the dining room had fallen silent while they waited for Dr. Reaper to announce George's punishment. But Dr. Reaper surprised them. Instead of giving George an earful, he just sat down next to him on the long bench. "Go on," he waved a red hand at the rest of the room. "Get on with your lunches. The bell will ring soon enough, you know." After a couple of seconds, the usual hubbub started up again, and as everyone lost interest in George and went back to his or her conversations. "So, George," said Dr. Reaper chumly. "Yes, Dr. Reaper," said George nervously. "How are you?" Dr. Reaper sounded as though he really wanted to know. Fine," said George, somewhat taken aback. "How are things at home?" "Well, they're okay," said George cautiously, hoping Reaper wasn't going to ask him about Cosmos. "And how about your neighbor?" said Dr. Reaper, trying and failing to sound casual. "Have you seen him lately? Is he around at the moment, or perhaps has he gone away?" George tried to figure out what answer Dr. Reaper wanted so he could give him the opposite one. "Perhaps people on the street are wondering where he's gone," went on Dr. Reaper, sounding spookier and spookier. "Maybe it seems that he has just disappeared, vanished from view. No idea where he might be. Is that it?" He peered hopefully at George, who was now convinced that there was something very wrong with Dr. Reaper. Almost as though Dr. Reaper sketched a shape in the air with his hands. "He just flew off into outer space and never came back? What about that, George? Is that what happened, would you say?" The teacher was gazing at George, obviously wanting to hear what Eric had somehow melted away into thin air. "Actually," said George, "I saw him this morning. He hadn't, but seemed very important to tell Dr. Reaper he had." "Drat!" muttered Dr. Reaper angrily, suddenly getting to his feet. "Miserable boys!" He walked off without even bothering to say goodbye. George closed up his lunchbox and decided to head back to the bulletin board so that he could look for his rock in the trash can. As he hurried down the corridor, he passed Dr. Reaper's office. He heard raised voices and stopped to listen through the door for a second. "I told you to deliver the note," rasped the familiar voice of Dr. G. Reaper. "We did," whined a boy's voice, which sounded all too like Ringo's. "You couldn't have," insisted Dr. Reaper. "You just couldn't have." George would have stayed to listen longer, but then the bell rang and he desperately wanted to find his outer space rock before class began. However, when he got back to the trash can, it had been emptied. There was only a clean plastic liner inside it. Saturn's mini-moon had gone.